Hey, good morning, FCF. We're continuing our journey through Philippians chapter 2. We had a bit of a break. I had a long-term flu and feel much better back at it. So we're going to pick up in chapter 2 in Philippians, verse 20 through 30 we're going to do. But to give you context, I want to take you back to verse 26. Because the Apostle Paul is talking about a particular man. His name is Epaphroditus. And he gives us this picture of how Paul esteems people on a much different basis than what people are esteemed in secular societies, both in biblical times and now. You know, mostly it's about power and prestige, or, you know, intelligence, or some sort of skills, talents, and things of that nature. But Paul focuses in on somebody's devotion to Christ and to the work of God on earth. And he says that's where you want to put the measuring tape to esteem somebody or to give honor to them. We'll see all that. So let me start with his introduction to Epaphroditus, who was with him during this incarceration in Rome, or at least was with him for a time. Verse 25. He says, I think it's necessary to send back to you Epaphroditus, my brother. Listen to the description he gives him: fellow worker and fellow soldier, who is also your messenger, whom you sent to take care of my needs. Pause for a minute. So Epaphroditus is there in Rome with Paul. He's under this house arrest for about 2 years. And so Epaphroditus is essentially, he comes from Philippi, and when it says to take care of my needs, it could have been things like this. Roman prisoners often weren't given adequate clothing. They weren't given adequate food. Paul would have needed parchments. He would have needed writing, we wouldn't say pens today, the type of stylus stuff they used then. It's possible Epaphroditus could have even been the one writing for Paul. We know he mentions his poor eyesight in other places. Paul could have been dictating, he could be writing. So these are the kind of services. Now, these are all behind the scenes services. They could be construed as being really minuscule, but you got to put it into a context. This guy leaves his home in Philippi. Maybe he had a family. It certainly would have been unusual. He has to leave his livelihood for a time, and he goes all the way to Rome, makes this long journey, and he's there for an indefinite period of time, just trying to make sure that Paul has all he needs to survive and to still continue to function as a servant of Christ. But Epaphroditus evidently he's not preaching to anyone. He's not teaching anyone. He's not out in front. He's in the back. Now listen to the way Paul talks about him. So I'm going to pick up now in verse 28. He had mentioned in the other verses that during this time Epaphroditus got sick and he almost died. Verse 28. He says, therefore I'm all the more eager to send him so that you may see him again and you may be glad. Listen to the emotional words, glad, and I may have less anxiety. Now this is interesting. Paul is acknowledging that he had worry, that he had anxiety. You're going to see in chapter 4, he speaks about anxiety. For example, chapter 4, verse 6, he says, do not be anxious or worried about anything, but in everything by prayer and petition with thanksgiving, present your request to God. It's not an unusual thing for me to have heard through the years. People say, well, Randy, is worry a sin? You know, because Jesus says in Matthew 6, don't worry, God will provide and all that kind of thing. And when I hear that, I always feel uncomfortable, because I know that the person sees God in an inappropriate light. They're seeing him more of like a magistrate that is always looking to see if we've broken a law, as opposed to someone who loves us and, like a good physician, wants to see us as well as can be. So when the scripture tells us not to worry, it's essentially God saying, you don't have to do this. It is our tendency to do this because we're creatures locked into time and we have very little control over ourselves or circumstances. But God is saying, it's not about whether it's a sin to worry. It's just that you don't have to do this. And God's kind of inviting us into less anxiety. But nevertheless, to worry, to have anxiety, is not a sin, albeit it is unnecessarily punishing ourselves and in the process accomplishing nothing, is what it comes down to. But anyway, Paul acknowledged, he says, man, when I send Epaphroditus back, I'm hoping it's going to bring gladness to you guys, and it's going to take some anxiety off of me. Now he goes into verse 29, welcome him in the Lord with great joy and honor men like him. Again, he's telling them, he's saying, man, you need to esteem this guy. This guy's a fellow soldier. He's a brother. He's a warrior. He almost lost his life for the sake of Christ, because he almost died, verse 30, he almost died for the work of Christ, risking his life to make up for the help you could not give me. Now, I want you to apply this in a personal way, because if you look at the things that Epaphroditus did, other than the long journey, that was pretty dramatic and sacrificial, but when he was there, he was just doing things that helped Paul out on a daily basis. Hey man, you need some extra food. The Romans not feeding you enough. Here's some food. You need something to keep you warm. They're not giving you warm clothing. Here's that. You need somebody to help you write. You need some parchments. I'll go hustle and earn some money and get you the parchments. These are these things that would come under the category, when you look at spiritual gifts, of the gift of helps. And yet here's this individual, Epaphroditus, that had the gift of helps that we tend to esteem on a low scale today. We should not. It's not the way God sees it. But nevertheless, we think, oh yeah, that's just these things that anybody can do. Well, just because anybody can do them, it doesn't mean that they're not extremely important. The work of God and the effectiveness of any local church is much, much more dependent upon the multitudes of people that provide this kind of behind-the-scenes work week in and week out, day in and day out, frankly, than it is people like me who are kind of the face of things. Because I wouldn't be the face of things. There would be no thing. There would be no church if it weren't for the multitudes of people like Epaphroditus who do these things, the hard work, the unappreciated work, the unnoticed work. And Paul says, when this guy comes home to you, I hope it gives you gladness. And man, you need to esteem this guy. He's the real deal. He's a model for you. So my hope is that as we pass out of this particular portion of Scripture today, maybe somebody listening today, you're that person that Jesus talked about in Matthew 25. You feel like you're the guy with one gift. Remember he gave several gifts to people, and then he came back and measured how they use them. And the danger with the one gift person, if you feel like your gift is inconsequential, if you feel like your service, your talent, your ability, your investment is inconsequential, sometimes you don't give it. You feel like you don't matter, and that just isn't true. It is faithfulness to use the opportunities, the experiences, the talents, the spiritual gifts that God gives us. That's what makes somebody a co-worker, a fellow soldier, and someone worthy of honor and esteem. And I hope maybe that'll pick somebody's flagging spirits up today. So we'll pick it up again tomorrow. Thank you.